Good morning, everybody. It's me again, Truth Teacher, coming at you with another video. And my big, beautiful forehead, as you can see. The hair of the day is just, I don't know. What is the hair of the day? It's just a big puff. But I'm on my daily stroll. And I figure let me just put out a quick live stream video. If anybody jumps in, that's cool, and if you don't, that's cool, you'll see it later. But anyway, from my last video, I'm still getting comments on that one, talking about the identity crisis that, quote unquote, black and brown people go through, being a result or a fallout of colonialism. I guess there's certain people that were really triggered because I made the statement that as people of African descent, we don't have to make up any history. And I think by this point we all have heard, all these different stories or whatever about, fantastical tales of Africans being everywhere in the world and doing everything and being the founders of every civilization that ever was, And my thing is that we have real documented history, real cultures. We don't have to make anything up. The reality of what we've done and who we are and what we're doing now is really impressive enough. We don't have to make anything up, But still, you have those people who are just, I don't know, they have some kind of emotional deficit that they think they have to be the be all and end all and in everything in order to have some kind of sense of significance. And if you're not saying that, black people invented every freaking thing, that somehow or another that's a slight, and you're stealing our history and all of this. And I just think it's really ridiculous. Now, one of the main things that a lot of people always talking about is this idea that Africans actually made it to the Americas before Columbus did and founded civilizations in Mesoamerica. And I'm on the strong side that shit never happened. Okay? Now, we do have a historical account of a king of Mali who made an expedition, who commissioned an expedition of exploration to see what was on the other side of the sea. And according to the report, what happened was they sent out like hundreds of ships, right? And none of them came back except for one. And when that one ship came back, they said they got all the way out into the sea, and they encountered something that was like a river in the middle of the water, and that all the other boats went into it. They stayed back, waiting for them to return. And after a month or whatever, nobody came back. They turned around and headed home. So the king put together an even bigger expedition, and this time he went on it himself. And they went out into the sea, but nobody from that expedition ever returned to say what happened. Now, it sounds to me from the report, what they were talking about reaching a river in the middle of the sea, sounds to me like what they were trying to describe was an ocean current. And there is an ocean current right off the coast of Senegal or whatever, right? It does carry right into the Caribbean. and into Brazil, that area, that whole area. But now, did these people actually make contact with the Americas? I mean, like, who knows? That's the only report that we have of Africans actually making an expedition to the other side of the ocean, or attempting. Now, as far as claims that Africans were here and making regular contact with the Americas, there's so much evidence against that theory. I mean, it's got more holes in it than Swiss cheese. So, for one thing, let's just look at this. You're talking about people from the old world going to the new world and making regular contact, having trade. Now, my question is this. If they were making regular trade, right? Wouldn't you expect to find aspects of material culture, cultural culture in the Americas that you found in Africa? All right, so let's just look at one thing, okay? For one thing, all of the cultures in West Africa had been Iron Age civilizations. They'd been using iron since something like 1,500 years before Christ, and they were experts at it. Now contrast that with all of the civilizations in the Americas, specifically Mesoamerica. They never learned how to smelt anything more complex than copper. They knew how to work silver, they know how to melt, work gold. Copper was the only thing that they learned how to work. So, if that's the case, don't you think that ironworking would have been one of the techniques that they learned if they had Africans who came over and founded a civilization? Second thing, let's look at something like farming, right? In all of the Americas, there's only a couple of animals that they learned how to domesticate, right? In the Andes, they domesticated the llama and the alpaca, right? In North America and the Mesoamerica, the only other animal they domesticated were dogs. They had absolutely no knowledge of cattle. There were no cows. There were no goats. There were no sheep. Nothing like that. None of those animals existed before the Spaniards arrived in the Americas. Now, West African civilizations had been domesticating these animals for thousands of years. So don't you think if they came to the Americas, they would have brought cows, they would have brought sheep, they would have brought goats? A lot of the West African civilizations also had domesticated horses. They had cavalry. They had cavalries that were mounted on horseback. Yet we don't see any horses in the Americas until the Spaniards came. As a matter of fact, when the Spaniards came to the Americans and they saw them on horseback, they didn't know what kind of creature this was, right? They thought it was some kind of monster. So that blows that theory out of water. You got civilizations who have a strong tradition of using goats, sheep, cows for food products, you know? But they go all the way over to trade with another group of people and they don't bring those things with them? How is that possible? Let's look at something else. It's a very simple thing. We know that one of the reasons why they started bringing African slaves over to the Americas was because a lot of the native people started dying from unknown diseases, right? West Africans were immune to those diseases because they had been in contact with people from North Africa who were in contact with people in Europe. So all of those old world diseases, chickenpox, smallpox, all of that stuff, Africans already had immunity to it because they were exposed to it. So if Africans had been in contact, regular contact with the Native Americans here, don't you think they would have already gone through, their period of die-off and recovery and then had immunity to these old world diseases? But that's not what happened, right? When the Europeans came here, these people started dying off in droves because they had no immunity. So how is it that you have Africans coming over who've been exposed to these diseases, who are carrying these diseases, but they don't pass that immunity on to the Native Americans over here? How does that happen? Let's look at religion now, okay? So the predecessor of Mansa Musa, his brother, that's the one we have the report of, him setting out the expedition to see what was on the other side of the ocean. Now, these people were Muslims. Was there any account from any European that came over to the New World that they had found Muslims in the Americas? Is there any tradition of Islam anywhere in the Americas prior to the slave trade when they started bringing over Africans? Absolutely not. So how is it that you come over to a new place and you don't bring your religion with you? Does that make sense? And Islam is a religion of evangelism, right? It's a religion of converts. So you're telling me that Muslims came over to the Americas, they found all of these native peoples, and they didn't try to make converts? How does that make sense? So how are Moors here in the Americas when there was no Islam? That doesn't make any kind of sense. It's just looking at all of these things, and when you look, it sounds good on paper, a lot of this stuff, right? But when you really take a closer look at it, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And, like I said, as people of African descent, we have absolutely nothing to feel ashamed of. We have absolutely no reason to feel less than, because we have real documented history. We have real documented cultures. We don't have to make up myths, to think that we need to prove to the white man that we were capable of civilization in order for them to respect us. Like I said before in the other video, the reason why they treated Africans the way they did had absolutely nothing to do with race. It had absolutely nothing to do with any idea of racism or inferiority. They were not jealous of our magical melanin. It had nothing to do with that. It was all basically economic. That's what everybody keeps missing the point on. White supremacy, what it really is just one of many tactics that the ruling elite class created in order to maintain power. And to get a real understanding of this, you have to study European history from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance period, because you'll see the way that society was constructed. It was a hierarchy. It was a hierarchy with the nobility on top and everybody else on the bottom in varying stages of privilege, right? So everybody didn't have the same amount of privilege, even if you were in the aristocracy. You see, and this is another thing that people get twisted when we start talking about, issues of, for example, white privilege. People don't understand that privilege, there's stages to it. There's levels to that game. Everybody doesn't have the same amount of privilege. So society was created in a hierarchy. Even within the nobility, there were hierarchies. That's why you have different titles. Earls, dukes, lords, kings, different levels of privilege in the society. And so outside of the nobility, the common people, you had the mercantile class, people who owned businesses. That was another group, right? They were below the nobility, but they were not peasants, right? The peasants were on the complete bottom, right? Because they were the labor force that everybody else depended on. So they were on the complete bottom. And when you look at the way those people were treated, when you look at the way the power dynamics worked out, even within the noble class, then you will understand what was done to Native Americans and Africans over here. Because, for example, we always talk about the sexual abuse that was perpetrated against Native American people and Africans, right? But that was the same thing that was happening even in the noble class. If you were a king, basically you could do whatever the fuck you wanted with whoever you wanted. When you really look at the history, it's fucking scandalous how these kings would just sleep with married women. With married women in the noble class. And their husbands couldn't say a goddamn thing about it. So what do you think they were doing when they had access to women from the lower classes? What do you think they were doing with all those women that were servants in their palaces and their mansions and whatever? What do you think they were doing with those women? Don't you think they were taking advantage of them? Don't you think they were engaging in sexual misconduct? Because why? Because I fucking can. And who are you to tell me otherwise? They did. I have a friend she's not from Poland. Her parents were from Poland. And she was telling me that back in the day, the aristocracy in Poland, when a couple was getting married, the lord, the landlord, right? The aristocrat that owned all the land, that had all the peasants on it, they had a tradition called first rights. And first rights meant that the lord had the right to take the virginity of any woman that he chose who was living on his land. So what a lot of people would do is they would try to hide the fact that they were getting married, because when the landlord knew that a couple was going to get married on their wedding night, the landlord would come in and he would sleep with the new bride first before her husband slept with her. Does any of this sound a little bit familiar? Is any of this sounding a little bit familiar to you? So all that happened when the Europeans came over to the New World, all they did was transplanted their system, their social system of power, onto the new people that they found. Hey, I got peoples. Hey, Moreno, what's up, sweetie? Who else is here? Whoop, 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 whoop. Whoop. Okay, I'm back. Curly's and Ruben are two scholars who tackled this topic as well. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that have tackled this topic. You know, because it's out there, and as people who've experienced these things, there's a lot of healing, emotional and psychological healing that needs to be done. And I don't know if it was, these liberals, well-meaning liberals, or if it was done deliberately, but all these people that just keep constantly throwing up in our faces how we were subjugated, how we were abused, blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah, I fucking get it. I mean, there's a fine line between never forgetting the injustice that was done to us and then being programmed to look at yourself as a victim. And I gotta believe that for certain people, the reason why they keep harping on these things over and over again is because they want us to look at ourselves as victims. They want us to feel oppressed and powerless and angry, whatever, because it's part of the psychological conditioning to maintain their power status, right? The way I deal with it is by really taking a critical look at history, and that means having to step outside of the bubble of just looking at the history of people of African descent alone and looking at the larger picture. How were people in general treated? I mean, there's got to be a reason why you had so many people leaving Europe and coming over to the Americas. I mean, doesn't anybody think about that? If shit was so groovy back in old Europe, why the fuck were all these people getting on ships? And back then, to get on a ship, god damn, I mean, that shit was not the fucking Love Boat, y'all. Getting on a ship back then was a fucking grimy ass experience. But they were willing to do that to get away from wherever the fuck they were to come over here. Do you ever stop to think, how bad would things have to be in your life for you to get on a rat-infested, leaky, worm-ridden bucket of bolts where you'd be out to sea for months, starving, and you have absolutely no idea exactly where you're going or what things are going to be like over there? How many of us would be willing to do some shit like that? Not a hell of a whole lot. I know I would stay my black ass right fucking here. Unless you had a gun to my head. And there was nothing else I can do. I'll try to fucking find a way to make that shit work, before I do something like that. And so these people, man, listen, they were on the absolute bottom of society. And this is what I've been learning, talking to my white friends, who remember their history. Shit was not so great back in Europe, you know? So the only thing that happened is that back in Europe, the peasants were the bottom of society. And now when they came over to the Americas, they found a new group of people to be the workforce. And so naturally, those people became the bottom of the totem pole, right? Your labor force. Your labor force is always going to be the bottom of the totem pole. And so all they did was they shifted all of that stuff onto us. Now, the overwhelming majority of white people were still assed out. They didn't have a pot to piss in or a fucking window to throw it out of. But at least they had status. They weren't on the complete bottom anymore. They were a little bit above the others, and they got some privilege. And remember what I said. Privilege is on a sliding scale, okay? So just because you're white and you're poor, does that mean you have no privilege? No, you don't. You don't have as much privilege as a plantation owner, but you got more privilege than a slave or a Native American who's on a hacienda or a sugarcane or a cotton plantation. You got more privilege in society than those class of people, right? Because everything is about a pecking order. So let's look at it this way. For the slow taps who are having problems grasping this concept, let's just look at a family dynamic, right? You got a family that's made up of a mother, father, and let's say 3 kids, right? Let's throw grandma and grandpa in there, in the mix too, all right? Let's have a traditional family, right? Grandparents, parents, kids. Now, within the dynamic of the family structure, who do you think has more power, the kids or the parents? Do the kids have the same amount of privilege as the parents do? Or do the parents have more privilege? Obviously, the kids do not have the same amount of privilege as the parents. Oh, you know what? Let's make it really full. Let's throw the dog in there too. The dog is part of the family. All right, so you got grandma, grandpa, mom and dad, 3 kids and the dog. Now, we know the parents have more privilege than the kids and the dog, right? Now, within the parent group, who do you think has more privilege? We're talking about a traditional culture. The grandparents or the parents? Who has more privilege? Obviously, the grandparents, because they're the elders. They have more privilege than mom and dad. Now, mom and dad, who has more privilege? Does mom have the same amount of privilege as dad? Are they equal? No. Mom does not have the same amount of privilege in society that dad does, right? So we've already got that straightened out. We know that when it comes to privilege, the ones who have the most privilege are the parents. And within the parent group, the grandparents have the greatest amount of privilege, followed by the parents. Now let's look at the kids. We know the kids are below the parents. But now, who do you think among the kids has more privilege? The oldest kid, the middle kid, or the last kid born? Who has more privilege? When we look at Europe historically, who was the one that inherited all of the wealth? Was it the middle child or the youngest child? It was the oldest child, the oldest son, right? Because even if the oldest child was a daughter, she did not have as much rights or privilege as the oldest son. So the oldest son had more privilege over any of the girls in the family. So we got that pecking order going. Now, who do you think's got more privilege? The kids or the dog? Listen, you love your dog, right? You love your dog. But your dog ain't got the same amount of privilege as your kids, right? So it's the same dynamic. I don't know why people get this shit twisted. All right? There's levels of privilege within society. So within this whole racial hierarchy that was created, the Africans and Native Americans were on the lower end of the totem pole when it came to privilege. Okay? Even the poor ass white people who were shit out of luck and still are, let's keep it real, because of the levels of empowerment or disempowerment, they were given more privilege than people of African and Native descent, right? So that's where it is. Oh, let me say a quick shout out to everybody that's on the stream right now. I got 10 people. Where'd you all go? Oh, there you go. All right. I got, oh my God, I need glasses. Stephanie. Oh, for fuck's sake, what did I just do? Okay, look, I saw Blood Moon was there. I saw Koki was there. I can't see the chat anymore. You know, I'm just figuring out this newfangled technology. But shout out to everybody in the chat that's contributing. I guess I'll see your comments later unless I figure out how to do this. Oh, here we go. All right, so I want to give a shout out to Blood Moon. I think this says Stephanie. Stephanie Miles. Who else is here? Miss H. Hey, sweetie, what's up? How you doing, sweetie? Koki Angel. Jose, yo, Jose, what's up, man? And Lily, if you're there fucking lurking, don't give me a hard time, goddammit. I'm taking my walk and I'm going to the store. So, I'm multitasking. But yeah, you know, this is what we got to understand. This whole thing about privilege, it's on a sliding scale. You know? So, people of African descent, you know, we've been given a bag of goods when it comes to this whole thing about racism and all of this. You know, because logical people try to make sense out of the situation. Why are these people treating us so badly? Oh, well, you know, they're going to come up with, oh, well, it's because you're savages. It's because you're backwards. It's because you're primitive. None of that is true. None of that is true. These are just excuses that the power structure came up with after the fact to justify what they were doing. But the real truth of the matter is, these people are just fucking gangster. They will take advantage of anybody who is in a vulnerable position if they can. And if you take a really good look at history, you will see time and time again, this is exactly what they did. They would even do it to other nobility. These people were fucking cutthroat. It was no fucking joke. Okay? You know the saying, there's no honor amongst thieves? This is exactly what we're talking about. They went all around the world encountering civilizations that were older and more sophisticated than them, but what they did is they looked for weaknesses within those societies that they could exploit for their own benefit. People, that's all it is. It's all just about a bunch of fucking gangster-minded people being cutthroat and doing the most in order to maintain their power, their position of power and privilege. That's all it is. We're making this shit far more complicated than it needs to be. So now, being logical people, we hear this shit and we think, oh, well, they think we're backward, they think we're primitive, and, so we have to prove to them that we're not any of those things. And we think that in order to get respect, we have to be the most at everything. We don't. We had our civilizations, we had our cultures, we had our accomplishments and all of that, and we're still making accomplishments. But none of that matters because it's not the reason why they did what they did to us had nothing to do with any kind of idea of inferiority whatsoever. The idea of inferiority was something that came later as a way to justify why they were doing to us what they were doing. That's it. It's really that simple. So, no, Africans did not come to the Americas first, before Columbus. And even if we did, you think these people would give a fuck? Hell no. Because what they want is they want to make their money. They don't give a fuck. Yo, if a crook is going around looking to rob buildings, looking to rob houses, do you think they're going to stop and, oh, you know what? That house is really pretty. Those people, they must be really educated. They've really made something. They have high IQ. No, I'm not going to rob that house. I'm going to go rob, like that poor house down, on the other side of town. Yeah, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to rob those poor houses because, those people, they got low IQ. So that's where I want to go. Does that make sense? No. So, once again, let's put all this bullshit to rest. I mean, our history is not hidden from us. Only to the extent that it's not taught outright in school, the full totality of it. And think about it. You're going to the schools that have been created by the power structure. Why the fuck are they going to try to empower you? Let's just keep it 100. So, I mean, on one hand, we can say it's fucked up that they don't teach us these things in school. But on the other hand, why are we sitting here waiting for them to do things for us that we can do for ourselves? So, yeah, we go to school and we learn all this shit and we learn their version of history or whatever. But why do we have to stop there? Back in the day, we had libraries. I mean, that's what I fucking did. I went to the goddamn library. Now, we have documentaries by historical scholars. We've got all kinds of access to academic, archaeological, sociological resources and information. We can find out about the civilizations and the cultures in Africa where our ancestors came from and the things that they did. We have historical records about the inventions that people of African descent have made here in the Americas that have contributed to world civilization as we know it now. We have documentation about real contact between, African people in the Mediterranean world, in different parts of Europe, in the Middle Ages, in antiquity, in the Roman Empire, the Greek, civilization. We have real history. We don't have to make shit up. So, for everybody who's been coming at me and, pitching a fit, I mean, why are you upset when I'm telling you that your ancestors have created great things worthy of recognition, and we don't need to make up a history. Why are you upset with that? I don't know. But anyway, I did do a video on my channel about this whole thing about, Africans coming to the Americas before Columbus. You can go check that video out. I go into more detail there that I am here. Another good resource on YouTube that you can check out, go check out these two guys. The From Nothing channel. He's done, I think, one or two videos on this question about, pre-Columbian African contact and also home team history. Those are two brothers there who really know their history when it comes to Africans. And I think From Nothing, I think if you go on his channel, he has a website, either in his More To section or on his separate website. He has historical sources, real historical sources where he's got his information. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper and do your own research, you certainly can. So to close out answering this question, did Africans have regular contact in the Americas before Columbus? No. Was there an attempt to cross the Atlantic? According to some sources that we have, yeah. Is it possible that from time to time an African fishing off the coast of West Africa in Senegal got caught up, blown out to sea and caught up in a current and then, made landfall somewhere in the Americas? Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it probable? No real information there about it, so we don't know. But we definitely know that there's no cultural exchange that was happening between these two areas of the world before the European arrival, and it just is what it is. Once again, we have enough within our own history to be proud of, to be admired, and to learn. We don't have to make anything up. And we don't have to go around the whole goddamn globe claiming that, oh, the first Chinese were black, and Buddha was black, and the first Europeans were black, and the King of England were black, and Queen Elizabeth was black. And no, we don't have to do that, because when you do that shit, nobody fucking takes you seriously. And all of this, Afrocentric, historical, revisionist, exaggerations, it just makes people look at us, give us the side eye, and they don't take us seriously. And so it's actually doing more harm than good, because it doesn't matter how loud you scream at people on a street corner, or how much you go and you spam them and troll their comment section on YouTube. That's not going to gain you any kind of respect or have people take you seriously when you're obviously pulling stuff out of your ass. People just look at you as a joke. They look at you as being weak-minded and pathetic and having an extremely big inferiority complex. And there is absolutely no reason whatsoever why any of us need to be having an inferiority complex about anything at all. So with that, people, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna go over here and buy myself some ginger, some mint tea, and I'm gonna catch you all later. So love, light, peace, prosperity, and perfect health to all of you. Peace. And now I gotta figure out how to turn this off.